He returned to the city a little earlier than anyone expected. His flight had landed before sunrise, and even though he was tired from days of meetings, he didn't want to go home just yet. He asked his driver to take him straight to a small office building across town where he had a quick appointment. On the way there, he leaned his head against the window and watched the empty streets slowly fill with people starting their day. He wasn't the emotional type, but mornings always made him reflective. He often thought about how far he had come from his difficult childhood, and how important it was to make sure his home was a place of warmth for the daughter he had adopted years ago. The streetlights were still fading when he saw something on the sidewalk that made him sit up straight. At first he thought it was just another person resting, wrapped in a blanket, trying to stay warm, but something tugged at him, something he couldn't explain. He asked the driver to slow down. As the car rolled forward, the bundle on the sidewalk shifted, and a thin hand appeared from inside the blanket. He frowned. There was something familiar about the way the person held themselves curled tightly, as if hiding from the world. The closer he got, the stranger he felt, like his mind was trying to warn him about something before his eyes fully understood it. "Stop the car," he said suddenly. The driver pulled over. For a moment, the businessman just stared through the window, unsure if he should step out or if he was imagining things. He opened the door slowly, as if afraid the moment would break if he moved too quickly. The young woman sitting on the cold pavement pulled the blanket closer, turning away from the street. Her hair was messy, her clothes wrinkled, and her face half hidden. She looked like she hadn't slept well. She looked like she hadn't eaten well either. But underneath all that, he recognized something. A memory, a piece of home. He took one step, then another. His breath grew heavier. When he finally stood in front of her, the world around them went quiet. Even the sound of cars seemed far away. The girl lifted her head just slightly, as if sensing someone near her. For half a second, their eyes met. And that was all it took. His heart dropped. It was her, the daughter he had taken into his home, raised with all the care he could give, protected from every hardship he knew too well. The same daughter who always greeted him with a shy smile when he walked through the door. The same daughter who always tried to make him proud, sometimes too hard, but now she sat on the street, looking tired, fragile, and lost. He whispered her name, unsure if his voice would even reach her. She froze, then turned her face away, as if trying to disappear inside the blanket. Shame washed over her face, and that broke him even more. He knelt in front of her. "Look at me," he said softly. She didn't. Her eyes stayed glued to the ground. He didn't push her. Instead, he took a slow breath. "What are you doing here?" he asked gently. "Why didn't you come home?" No answer. He reached out, careful not to startle her, and touched her shoulder lightly. She flinched at first, then relaxed just a little when she realized who it was. Even then, she didn't speak. Her silence scared him more than anything else. It wasn't just embarrassment. It wasn't just exhaustion. It felt like she had given up on something, maybe even on herself. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's go home." Her lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, she looked down at her hands, small, cold, trembling slightly. She didn't refuse him, but she didn't move either. He took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. She tried to push it away at first, but he placed it back gently and held it there until she stopped resisting. "Please," he said, softer than she had ever heard him, "let me take you home." After a long moment, she nodded very slowly. The driver rushed out to open the door for her, but the businessman carried her the first few steps when her legs struggled to support her. She wasn't injured, but she was weak, much weaker than she should have been. She settled into the back seat quietly, still avoiding his eyes. He sat next to her. For the first few minutes, the ride was silent. The city outside the window looked the same as always, but inside the car, everything felt unfamiliar. He kept sneaking glances at her pale face, her tired eyes, the way she held the blanket as if afraid someone would take it from her. He wanted answers, but he also knew she wasn't ready still. Questions filled his mind like a storm. Why was she outside? Did someone hurt her feelings at home? Did she run away? Did something happen when he was out of town? And the most painful question of all, why didn't she come to him? He knew he wasn't always the easiest person to talk to. He worked too much, traveled too often, and sometimes forgot how sensitive she could be. He had promised himself many times that he would do better, but life kept getting in the way, and somehow, he kept letting time slip without noticing how she felt. Now, seeing her like this, he felt something heavy sit in his chest. Guilt, regret, fear, a mix of all three, at one point. He reached out and placed his hand over hers. She didn't pull away this time, but she didn't hold his hand either. She simply let it rest there. He didn't force conversation. Instead, he waited. hoping she would speak when she felt safe again. As they approached the mansion, the sun had fully risen. The large iron gates opened slowly, and the security guard stared in surprise when he saw who was in the car. They stopped at the front entrance. The businessman stepped out first, then helped her out carefully. She looked nervous, almost guilty, as if afraid someone inside the house would judge her when they walked in. The maid, who had been taking care of the home for years, rushed out from the hallway. The maid's eyes widened the moment she saw the girl wrapped in a blanket, looking weak and exhausted. A strange mix of shock and guilt flashed across the maid's face, something that businessman noticed immediately. He tightened his jaw. Something in the maid's expression bothered him, but he didn't say anything yet. The daughter, noticing the maid's reaction, lowered her head even more, almost hiding behind his arm. The maid stepped closer, her voice shaking. "Sir, he raised a hand sharply, not out of anger, but because he didn't want questions or explanations right now. His daughter needed rest, warmth, and food. Everything else could wait. He gently guided her upstairs, the maid watching them with worry written all over her face. Inside her room, he helped her sit on the bed. The silence between them was filled with emotions neither of them could express yet. He brought her water, then called the house doctor to check on her. She drank slowly, small sips, her hands still trembling. When she finally looked at him properly, her eyes were filled with something that pierced his heart, fear mixed with shame. He sat beside her. "You're home," he said softly. "Nothing else matters right now." She swallowed hard, but said nothing. He didn't push. He knew there was a story behind her silence, a reason behind her running away, a truth he wasn't ready for, but needed to hear. But for now, all that mattered was that she was safe, sitting in her own room, finally under the same roof again. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know what answers he would hear, but he knew one thing for certain. He would not let her slip away again, not in silence, not in fear, and not because of misunderstandings he didn't see coming. And as he sat there beside her, watching her slowly relax in the comfort of home, he made a quiet promise inside his heart. Whatever the truth was, he would handle it with patience this time. He would listen, he would not judge, and he would not let anger cloud his mind. But he had no idea that his biggest test was still waiting downstairs, and the misunderstanding already forming in his mind would soon shake the house in a way no one expected. The house felt unusually quiet after he helped his daughter settle into bed. Normally, mornings in the mansion were filled with movement, maids preparing breakfast, cleaners walking around, the soft sound of dishes and footsteps echoing through the hallways. But today, everything felt heavy, tense, and uncertain. He stood by the doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe slowly as she tried to rest. Even though he told himself not to overthink, his mind wouldn't stop. He wanted to know what had pushed her to such a low point. He wanted answers, but he didn't want to force them out of her when she was already fragile. He finally stepped out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. As he walked down the hallway, he saw one of the older maids quietly peeking from around a corner. The moment she met his eyes, she quickly straightened and lowered her head respectfully. He noticed she looked nervous, more nervous than usual. He didn't react immediately. He simply walked past her, heading toward the main staircase. But before he reached the first step, the memory of how she reacted earlier flashed through his mind, the shock in her eyes, the way she seemed almost afraid when she saw his daughter at the door. He brushed the thought aside, telling himself he was probably overthinking things because he was emotional. Still, something didn't sit right as he reached the living room. The other staff members were already standing there silently, waiting for instructions. They didn't know exactly what had happened, but the tension in the air told them something serious was going on. He scanned the room, and his gaze fell on the maid who had been closest to his daughter over the last few months. She was standing near the edge of the room, her hands shaking a little, as if she was bracing herself for something bad. The businessman walked toward her slowly. "What happened while I was away?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Did she say anything? Did something go wrong here?" The maid swallowed hard before speaking, "Sir." But before she could finish a single sentence, he raised a hand slightly, not to silence her rudely, but because her nervousness was making him uneasy. Her hesitation felt like guilt, and guilt felt like responsibility. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I found her on the street this morning," he said softly. "Homeless, wrapped in a blanket, too weak to stand." The moment he said it, the maid's eyes widened further, and tears began to build in them. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. He mistook that silence. He thought she was hiding something. The weight of the morning, the shock of finding his daughter outside, the exhaustion from travel, everything mixed together in his chest. tightening like a fist. His emotions were clouded, and though he tried to stay calm, frustration slipped through the cracks. How did she end up there? He asked again, this time louder, sharper. She had a home, a room, everything she needed. How did she leave without anyone noticing? The maid looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers anxiously. Sir. Her voice broke, and the pause between words felt too long, too guilty, too much like she was hiding something important. He took another step closer. Did you say something to her? Did you do anything that upset her? Just tell me the truth. The maid shook her head quickly, her eyes wide, but she still struggled to speak. No, sir, I didn't. She just, but again, she couldn't form a full sentence. That to him, it looked like fear. To him, it looked like guilt. And to a father who had just found his daughter on the street, fear and guilt felt like evidence. He took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. But his voice came out in a way he didn't intend, firm, frustrated, and full of emotion he had been trying to hold back. You were responsible for her while I was away, he said. You were the one she spent the most time with. If something happened, you should know. The maid wiped her eyes quickly. I tried to help, he repeated, his voice rising slightly. Is that what you call it? The staff members shifted uncomfortably. Everyone could feel his anger, but no one dared to step in. He wasn't the type to shout. He wasn't the type to lose control. But right now, the image of his daughter on that cold street kept repeating in his mind, filling him with fear he didn't know how to express. That, and fear often looks like anger. Tell me exactly what happened, he said again, slower this time but no less intense. How did she leave? Why didn't you inform me? Why didn't anyone stop her? The maid stepped back slightly, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Sir, please, let me explain. But the man's patience was thin, worn down by worry and guilt. His emotions were louder than her trembling voice. He took a breath that trembled slightly. I trusted you, he said. I trusted you with my home, with my daughter's safety. I know, sir, she whispered. And you failed me, he said quietly, the words coming out before he could stop them. The room fell completely silent. The maid lowered her head, her shoulders shaking. The other staff members looked away, unable to watch. At that moment, he didn't want to hear excuses. He didn't want to hear anything except a clear reason why his daughter had ended up alone, outside. In his mind, the only possibility was that the maid must have done something or said something that pushed his daughter away. He didn't wait for more explanation. You're dismissed, he said. The words were soft, but they felt like a hammer hitting the ground. The maid stopped breathing for a moment. Sir, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. I would never, but he raised a hand again, signaling she shouldn't speak further. I'm sorry, he said, though he didn't sound sorry. He sounded tired, drained, and angry at the world for letting his daughter suffer. I can't keep someone in this house who can't protect the people inside it. The maid covered her mouth to stop herself from crying out loud. She looked toward the staircase, her eyes full of worry, not for herself, but for the girl upstairs. You don't understand, she whispered shakily. She didn't, but he stepped back and turned away before she could finish. Pack your things, he said. You should leave by this afternoon. The maid collapsed onto a nearby chair, crying silently. The other staff members didn't dare move. Some wanted to comfort her, but they were too afraid to get involved. While the atmosphere was still tense, the businessman walked away with heavy footsteps, each step echoing through the silent room. Inside his chest, something was twisting painfully. He didn't feel relieved after firing her. Instead, he felt a strange emptiness, almost like he had done something wrong, but he pushed that thought away. He told himself he was only protecting his daughter. He told himself he was doing what any father would do if their child had been found on the street. He told himself that he was right, but the uneasiness remained. He went back upstairs, trying to calm himself before walking into his daughter's room. When he opened the door, she was sitting up slightly, her eyes half open. She looked at him, and for a moment, her expression changed just slightly, but enough for him to notice. It wasn't relief. It wasn't happiness. It was worried, as if she had heard something, as if she already knew. Someone downstairs had been punished because of her. He sat beside her, trying to read her expression. She looked away, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Are you okay? He asked softly. She nodded, but her eyes were glistening with something he couldn't understand yet. He reached for her hand again. I'm here, he said. You don't have to be afraid. But deep down, she wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. She was afraid of him finding out the truth, afraid of what her mistake had caused, afraid that someone innocent had paid the price for her silence. She closed her eyes tightly, and a tear slipped down her cheek. The businessman gently wiped it away. thinking she was crying because of the pain she went through on the street, but the truth was much heavier, and he had no idea that his decision downstairs had created a new wound, one that would hurt even more when the truth finally came out. The house stayed quiet for the rest of the morning, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that sits in the air like a heavy blanket, making every movement feel slow and uncertain. The businessman walked through the halls with a complicated mix of determination and regret. He had made a bold decision downstairs, but now that the anger had cooled, he felt something uncomfortable inside his chest, something that made him question whether firing the maid had been the right thing to do. He tried to distract himself by checking emails, pacing around his office, sipping tea he barely tasted, but nothing worked. His mind kept going back to the moment he found his daughter on the street, and every time her tired face flashed in his memory, anger and guilt twisted together again. He kept telling himself that he had done what any protective father would have done, but a small part of him whispered that maybe he had acted too fast at hours past. He checked on his daughter several times, bringing her fruit, warm soup, and medicine. Every time he entered the room, she pretended to be asleep at first, but he could tell she was awake. She wasn't good at hiding her feelings, she never had been. Even as a child, her eyes always gave her emotions away before her words could. Each time he saw her, he noticed tiny changes. She looked less tired, but more tense. She avoided looking at him for too long. She turned her face toward the window whenever he asked how she felt. Something was bothering her deeply, but she didn't say a word. He thought she was still shaken from being outside. He assumed she just needed time, so he waited. After lunch, the doctor arrived and checked on her. The doctor said she wasn't physically harmed, just weak, dehydrated, and emotionally overwhelmed. She needed rest, good food, and a peaceful environment. A peaceful environment. Those words stayed with him for a while. He walked out of the room, thinking about the maid packing her things downstairs, crying silently as she folded clothes she had washed for years. He remembered seeing her hand shake when he fired her. He remembered her trying to say something but losing her voice. He pushed that memory aside again. He thought he had made the best decision for his daughter, but the truth was already moving quietly through the house, like a shadow. Later in the afternoon, when the daughter finally opened her eyes properly, she noticed her father sitting quietly in the corner of the room, looking out the window with a troubled expression. She watched him for a moment, guilt tightening in her chest. She didn't want to add more weight to his already heavy worry, but she knew she couldn't keep the truth hidden forever. Her fingers twisted nervously into the blanket. She tried to find courage, but every time she imagined his reaction, fear rose in her throat. She knew he was proud of her. She also knew he didn't show it openly, but she felt it in the little things like the way he always asked if she needed something before leaving for a trip, or how he reminded the staff to make her favorite breakfast when he was running late, and that made her secret feel even heavier. Her breath trembled slightly, and that tiny sound caught his attention. He turned toward her immediately. "You're awake," he said softly. She nodded, but her eyes darted toward the door, as if searching for someone. He caught the look. "Are you looking for something?" Her lips parted, but she hesitated. "The maid, the one who takes care of this room." He paused. He wasn't expecting that to be her first question. "She's leaving the house," he said carefully. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. "Leaving why?" He didn't want to overwhelm her, so he spoke slowly. "Because she didn't protect you. You were gone for hours, maybe longer, and she didn't tell anyone. She didn't stop you. She didn't even call me." The girl's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but no words came. He continued, thinking she was simply shocked. "I couldn't keep someone who allowed that to happen." Her heartbeat quickened painfully. Her throat felt dry. She wanted to speak, but her mind froze, trying to find the right words. She stared at him with wide eyes, full of panic, but he misunderstood it as distress from remembering the night she left. He reached for her hand. "Don't worry, she's gone. You're safe now." But instead of calming her, his words made her feel worse, because the truth was completely different. She had left the house quietly, without telling anyone. She had hidden from the maid when the maid came to check on her. She had ignored the maid's soft knocks on her door. She had slipped out through the back garden, thinking she would clear her head and return, before anyone noticed. But she didn't return, not because she couldn't, but because she didn't want to face the truth. She had failed an important exam and thought her father would be disappointed. She didn't know how to explain the fear inside her, the pressure she felt, the heaviness that had been building for months. She had walked without a plan, sat in a park until it was dark, and then ended up on the street, too ashamed to come home. The maid had tried to find her. The maid had walked around the neighborhood, calling her name softly. She had even left food near the back gate. hoping the girl would come back secretly. She had been the only one worrying out loud while everyone else assumed the girl was in her room. But the father knew none of that, and the daughter hadn't told him. The girl swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears. She didn't do anything wrong, she finally whispered. He blinked, confused. What do you mean? She looked down, unable to meet his eyes. I wasn't pushed out. I left the house on my own. He stared at her, stunned. The words didn't make sense at first. You left without telling anyone? She nodded slowly. Why? His voice softened instantly. Her breath shook. I was scared. He moved closer. Scared of what? She hesitated, tears rolling down her cheeks. I failed the exam, the important one. I thought you'd be disappointed. I didn't know how to face you. I thought maybe if I stayed away until morning, I would figure out what to say. But the night got cold, and I got tired, and everything went wrong. He listened without interrupting. The more she spoke, the more his heart ached. She looked so small, so lost in her guilt, that he felt like he had missed something big, something he should have seen earlier. And the maid? He asked softly. She took a shaky breath. She tried to help me. When she realized I was gone, she looked for me. She didn't stop me because I left before she noticed. She thought I needed space. She didn't want to pressure me. She was worried, but she didn't want to make things worse. His chest tightened painfully. He pressed his fingers against his forehead, closing his eyes as everything he had misunderstood came crashing down on him. She didn't tell me you were gone, he murmured. She didn't want you to worry while you were traveling. The girl whispered. She thought I would come back soon. She left food outside for me. She didn't want you to think she lost control. Silence filled the room, heavy, sharp, heartbreaking. The girl wiped her tears. You fired her because of me, because of my mistake. He opened his eyes slowly. The truth sat in front of him clearly now, without any confusion. He had fired the wrong person. He had punished someone who had been trying to help. He had acted out of fear, not clarity. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded both regretful and determined. I have to fix this. The girl nodded weakly. Please, bring her back. She doesn't deserve to be sent away. He squeezed her hand gently. I will. I'm going to apologize to her. He stood up, feeling the weight of his actions settle on his shoulders. He knew he had made a mistake, a big one, but he also knew he had a chance to correct it. He walked toward the door, ready to find the maid before she left the mansion. But as he opened it, his daughter called out softly, Dad. He stopped and turned to look at her. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice trembling. For leaving, for causing this. He walked back to her and kissed her forehead. You don't have to be perfect to be loved, he said quietly. You don't have to hide when things go wrong. You can always come to me. Her tears flowed freely, but this time they carried relief. He left the room with a determined step. He was ready to face the maid, ready to apologize, ready to repair the damage, but he didn't know yet that the maid, hurt and heartbroken, was already at the gate, her bags packed, believing she had lost the home she had worked in for years. The courtroom was quiet when the veteran stood up again, though this time he didn't need help to steady himself. He looked stronger, almost like the weight he had carried for weeks was finally lifting. The judge watched him carefully, as if trying to predict what he would say. Even the people sitting in the back, who had been whispering nonstop earlier, were silent. The veteran took a slow breath and looked at the police chief's son. The young man looked nervous, his hands shaking slightly on the wooden table. He had been bold and careless before, but after everything that had come out in court, he looked like someone who finally understood the consequences of his actions. But instead of anger or bitterness, the veteran spoke with a calm voice. He told the judge that he didn't want more punishment added. He had already forgiven the young man, not because he wanted to excuse what happened, but because he believed forgiveness sometimes fixes what punishment cannot. People in the courtroom shifted in their seats, surprised. Forgiveness wasn't what most of them expected to hear. Many had come thinking the judge would announce a harsh sentence or that the veteran would demand something dramatic. But he didn't. He said he had seen enough pain in the world to know that spreading more didn't help anyone. He explained that he believed the young man needed a chance to make things right, not a lifetime label that would follow him forever. His words were steady, but there was something emotional behind them, something that made the room feel warmer and gentler. The judge listened carefully, nodding slowly. The police chief, sitting in the front row, lowered his eyes. It was probably the first time in a long while that he wasn't thinking like a chief, but as a father watching someone show kindness to his son when he least deserved it. When the veteran finished speaking, the judge leaned back in his chair. He took a moment before responding, maybe trying to let the weight of the veteran's words settle in the air. Then he said he agreed. The punishment he announced wasn't harsh, but it was meaningful. The young man would complete community service programs focused on helping elderly veterans and working in local hospitals. He would also attend counseling sessions and write a full apology letter describing what he had learned from the incident. It wasn't a sentence meant to ruin his life. It was one meant to rebuild it. The young man nodded quickly when the judge spoke. He wiped his eyes and took a deep breath, almost relieved. For the first time, he stood up on his own and turned to the veteran. He apologized softly, but his voice was clear. He said he was ashamed of what he did, and that he never wanted to be that kind of person again. His words didn't feel rehearsed. They felt real. That the veteran didn't interrupt him. He just nodded, accepting the apology with a calm expression. The two of them stood there for a moment, quietly, and the whole courtroom stayed still. There was something powerful about watching two people who were once on opposite ends of a painful situation meet in the middle with honesty and respect. When the judge dismissed the court, people began gathering their things, still whispering. Many had expected drama, anger, or outrage. Instead, they saw something they rarely witnessed: someone choosing grace when they had every right to choose anger. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter. Reporters stood near the steps, waiting to ask questions, but neither the veteran nor the young man wanted to talk to them. The police chief walked toward the veteran with slow, careful steps. There were no cameras pointed at them, no microphones waiting. It was just two men speaking quietly. The chief thanked him not as an authority figure, but as a father grateful that someone had shown kindness to his child when he couldn't change what happened. The veteran simply nodded and said everyone deserved a chance to grow. The chief's eyes softened, and he gently shook the veteran's hand before walking back to his son. The young man had been waiting, standing a little apart from the crowd, looking uncertain. But when his father reached him, he placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. The two of them walked away together, not proudly, but with the kind of humility that comes when life teaches a hard lesson. As the crowd thinned out, the veteran started walking toward the bus stop. His steps were slow, but steady. People who had watched him in the courtroom smiled as he passed, some giving him a nod of respect. He didn't expect gratitude from anyone, but he appreciated the warmth in those small gestures. At the bus stop, he sat on the metal bench and looked down at his hands. They carried old scars from years of service, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel weighed down by the past or the incident that brought him to court. Something about choosing forgiveness had freed him in a way he didn't expect. It felt like he had given himself the same kindness he had given to the young man. While waiting, he noticed a middle-aged woman nearby struggling with her grocery bags. Without hesitation, he stood and helped her lift them onto the bench. She thanked him with a grateful smile. He nodded, feeling that familiar instinct to help, an instinct that had shaped most of his life. When the bus finally arrived, the driver greeted him warmly. It was the same driver from the day the incident happened, the one who helped call for assistance when he was hurt. The driver recognized him immediately and asked if everything had been resolved. The veteran smiled and said it had ended in a way he didn't expect, but in a way that felt right. The driver nodded, saying, "Sometimes life surprises us in the best ways." The veteran agreed. As the bus rolled forward, he watched the city pass by busy streets, people walking with purpose, children chasing each other on sidewalks. Everything looked a little brighter, not because the world had changed, but because something inside him had. Later that afternoon, he stopped by the small cafe he visited often. The owner greeted him with a big smile, already preparing his usual tea before he even reached the counter. Word travels fast in small neighborhoods, and the owner had already heard about what happened. He asked gently if the veteran was okay, and the veteran nodded with a relaxed smile. He shared a bit about the day, not every detail, just enough for the owner to understand that things had ended peacefully. The owner shook his head in amazement. He said most people would have asked for harsh punishment, but the veteran chose a different path. The veteran took a sip of his tea and replied softly, "Sometimes giving someone a chance is the best kind of justice." The owner smiled at that, repeating the words as if they were something worth remembering while he sat there. The young man he had helped earlier with his math homework, the boy from the neighborhood, walked in with a notebook in hand. He spotted the veteran and hurried over. He wanted to show him his test results. A big red A+ was written across the top of the page. The boy beamed with pride. The veteran congratulated him warmly, feeling genuinely happy. It reminded him that his life wasn't defined by what had happened months ago. He was still someone who could make a difference in small but meaningful ways. The day slowly settled into the evening. Streetlights flickered on, and the warm orange glow spilled across the pavement. The veteran walked home at a comfortable pace. When he reached his apartment, he took a moment to breathe in the quiet. Everything felt calmer than it had been in a long time. He realized that life wasn't always about big victories or dramatic moments. Sometimes the real strength came from choosing peace when the world expected anger, or offering compassion when bitterness would have been easier. He looked out his window at the soft night sky and felt grateful not just for the judge's decision, but for the chance to heal, grow, and move forward. And as he closed his eyes that night, he carried with him something far more powerful than resentment, the quiet courage of forgiveness.